Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Grow Your Tutoring Business. Today you're going to meet Dr. Sheila Thomas. She has a unique pathway into tutoring, and she's an example of how if you are at the top of your game, of your tuition game, how it can become a consultancy. She actually now goes in and supports schools to bring up their psychology departments. And she does this living in Portugal. A lot of what she does is actually done remotely through Zoom or video calls. It's a really interesting listen. Get your notepads ready and enjoy. Welcome, everybody. We have a very special guest this week on the podcast. We've got Dr. Sheila Thomas. If any of you are listening and attended the first Q&A with myself and Sharon Corley, probably about 2 months ago, Sheila asked a question in the Q&A bit at the end where what it was really about, like this is I won't give it away, Sheila, because this will be your story. But it was kind of obvious that there was a path you needed to go down, and I think Sharon gave you some really good advice. But before we get to that bit, tell us a little bit about yourself, Sheila, and welcome.
Okay, right. Well, first of all, it's lovely to be invited onto your podcast. So yeah, just a little bit about me. I basically taught in the UK for about 25 years. So I have a foot in modern languages. That was my first degree. And then I moved over to psychology later in my career. And I was a head of psychology in schools in the independent sector and in the state sector. And I really enjoyed it. It was a wonderful subject to teach, and you could see the subject growing as the years went by. You know, it's become more and more popular. And then I relocated to Portugal at the end of December 2018 for a number of reasons. So my job was actually becoming more and more difficult to get to. Just the commute was becoming a major stress point in my day. And so my husband and I relocated in December 2018. And I just thought I would set up an online business offering tutoring to students.
Yeah.
So I formed the Psychology School Limited, got myself a website, and everything was going fine, and I was getting a few students coming through. I also had psychology teacher support website, and again I was approached by a few schools through that website to support their psychology departments. Sometimes it was online training, sometimes it was marking scripts that students had done on mock exams or past exam questions in the run-up to the exam. So, this is where students were already performing quite highly, but what else did they need to do to secure, the top grades or whatever? And I worked really successfully with a school in East London where it was lovely to see the teacher actually grow in confidence over the 4 years. I'm still working with them now, in fact. And she grew in confidence, became an examiner. The students grew in confidence, and now, they're applying to top class universities. They've become much more aspirational than they had been in the past. So, it was just really pleasing to nurture that relationship with both the teacher and the students. So, basically those two websites were going fine. But then I found in recent years, what has happened is that I've been approached by schools. So it's the principals and school leaders who have come directly to me very often when they've had some sort of crisis in their department. So the very first one was during the pandemic, and that was a maternity leave cover that this particular school were finding completely impossible to fill, because nobody wanted to relocate at that time. It was a January to December maternity leave. So again, nobody wanted to leave in the middle of the academic year and be faced possibly with 6 months of unemployment. So as a maternity leave contract, it wasn't that easy to fill.
Yeah.
And it was a former colleague of mine, actually, who became a head teacher, who said, could I possibly help them out? They tried the usual avenues for recruitment and found that not to be very satisfactory. And that was all done completely online. So to start with, it was the students in their own bedrooms, really. So it was during the pandemic, it worked very well, in fact. And then when they came back to school, we had whole class tuition with me on the whiteboard and a TA in the room. And I did all the teacher marked assessments, the teacher assessed grades.
Sheila,
If you
so
remember.
when you say, because there's a few points here. The first one is, so you relocated to Portugal.
Yeah.
You had your two websites set up. So one was mainly about tuition, and the other one
Yeah.
was really the consulting and helping teachers. Is that right?
Teacher support. Yeah, that's
And
right.
then, but the teacher one, it's actually led to you supporting teachers, but actually being in front of the classroom again, but not really in front of the
Yeah.
classroom, on the screen.
No, that's right. My
Wow.
LinkedIn profile seemed to be the way a few people got a hold of my name as well, because on there I'd put, that I'm offering tuition to students and teacher support as well. So a few people came to me via LinkedIn. And so basically I did that for the first year with this particular school. I did that full year's contract. And then just carried on with my own tutees just alongside that. I didn't have many tutees just because of the time constraints. But then once that big contract finished, I then got another big contract for a school in the UK where the head of psychology wasn't a specialist teacher. It was a single person department. And they felt very, very alone, really. And you can read so much about the subject and the specification, but I don't think there's any substitute for speaking to somebody who's actually experienced in doing what you're being asked to do.
Yeah, it's true.
And just like providing really, really good resources for the teacher to see how things can look and how they can be made really student friendly. And the students really responded well. Once we did a very good double act. So it was myself alongside the head of psychology, and again it worked beautifully. So myself on the screen, a TA in the classroom who sort of sorted out any minor discipline problems that there were. There weren't many, but these were classes of about 25. And then the head of psychology would come into the classroom and actually see how I was presenting things. So it was a win-win really for the teacher and for the students. And then they were delighted when their results came out and they got an astronomical figure of A's and A stars, which I think was a relief to everybody. And then I've just sort of progressed onto other big contracts from those two. So
are we talking word of mouth from this point, Sheila?
Well, we are. We're also talking we in psychology we have the ATP, so the Association of Teachers of Psychology, which is a brilliant organization. They have a conference every year. They produce a magazine quarterly, I think it is. And they're just a really lovely bunch of people who are very good at sharing best practice,
Mm,
supporting everyone teaching psychology. And so, I think some people knew my name from being a member of the ATP.
okay.
And so I didn't know the person that well, but they knew of me in a professional capacity through the ATP. Um, and that's how it's tended to go. So I haven't done any major marketing. I did do some what is it, e-marketing. So
Mm,
I wrote a book on research methods in psychology, with lots of practice questions with answers, and I self-published that through Troubadour. That was my lockdown project, really. And I know as a teacher, we were continually running out of practice questions, and being good at research methods can make 2 grades difference to a student. It is
okay.
that important. And it's also quite difficult to teach
Mm,
without putting people off, because you do have to learn a lot of definitions, you do
mm,
have to understand statistics.
mm,
um, so I produced some really user-friendly notes with lots of cartoons, a few little jokes thrown in there, to lighten the
mm,
material, which can be very dry and not accessible to students who don't like science.
mm.
Um, and then I coupled that with the book. Um, and I did some direct marketing, which was quite expensive actually, but not very remunerative.
Yeah.
I think these emails just landed in people's inboxes, and then nobody sort of looked any further.
Mm,
um, so it has, the word of mouth, LinkedIn, and my website, I
yeah.
think, have been the ways that people have come to know about me.
Mm,
Plus, I also try and raise my profile a little bit by writing to the Psychologist magazine. So, the British Psychological Society produced The Psychologist, and it's a very broad spectrum of issues that they deal with. So, some of the articles are aimed at clinical psychologists, some are aimed at researchers, but they do have an education division. And I've written numerous articles in there, talking about topical issues such
mm,
as the desperate lack of specialist psychology teachers. When we have so many students wanting to study psychology, we have a lot of graduates from universities who've studied psychology, but the graduates don't seem to want to come into education.
do we know why, Sheila?
I wish I knew. I do think education suffers a bit of a bad press. I
Mm,
think people might read some of the horror stories of how people have been treated, or their career hasn't really progressed, or I don't know. There's also there's a raft of issues, I think, which
I just
make
think like
it.
I'm thinking about someone who, like yourself, who obviously has got a passion for psychology. You follow through with finishing a degree, which then leads into a master's, which then leads into a PhD, which by the
Yeah.
way isn't overnight. We were talking before, and you said it took
No.
7 years. Like
7 years
a
part-time, yeah.
long process. It's a long, but a PhD is a long process. It's not something like
Yes,
your
it's
masters you
not
can
done
put.
overnight. No, no, no.
So when I think about like the natural progression like if you come out as a psychology grad, you then need to do I think the way into education would be then a PGCE or some sort of post-grad qualification. But the other side of that, is that a good use of that psychology degree and that knowledge? And what I mean by that, because it is, because teaching people your knowledge and then passing down that knowledge over time, that is a really good use of skill. But I'm thinking, if I was, say, 23, 24, and I just spent that time in, I suppose, investing in myself, and I've got this good degree or excellent degree, is there a way or a pathway into a different industry, which, I'm going to be really frank, that would pay more money and provide less stress?
Well, yes. I mean, if you have a psychology degree, I mean, you can go into educational psychology, but I mean, again, that requires a practically every specialism requires a doctorate. But yeah, I mean, there's forensic psychology, there's occupational psychology, there's research. And I know through speaking to people who run teacher training courses in psychology, so Manchester Metropolitan University do a very good PGCE. I think a lot of their graduates actually go to schools abroad. So they do go into education, but not necessarily in the UK. And again, I can see if you're 23, 24, you get a nice posting in a lovely international school. It's very attractive, isn't it? So, I can see how this, I mean, it's always been an issue. There's always been a lack of psychology teachers since the A-Level was first introduced. But I do think people need to start thinking a little bit outside the box, especially school leaders and principals, because this problem isn't going to go away. There aren't suddenly going to be a lot of graduates who say, yes, let's go and teach psychology in UK schools. So rather than, sort of trying to fudge things within the school, I think principals need to kind of think outside the box, realize that there is a lot of expertise out there that they need to tap into, and perhaps explore the online route more as a first option rather than waiting till they're in some sort of crisis, which is the sort of situations where I've been called upon. So I think some of it depends on the creativity of school leaders. They need to think, perhaps beyond the traditional model of just putting an ad in the TES and then recruiting whoever turns up. I think we've gone beyond that now. And so
sorry, Sheila.
I was just going to say that the pandemic, actually has opened people's minds up, though, to doing things in different ways. And the online scenario, I think, would have been a non-starter if you'd put that forward, say, 10 years ago.
I agree.
But actually now, I think people have realised, actually, it is possible. We can, tap into expertise without the need to.
This is maybe just in the UK, but globally potentially, although I've got no evidence of it. But this is like the dragging of education towards the 21st century, because industry have been doing this for years. If you needed a particular expert, you used to pay for them to come over on a plane and put them up in a hotel. That stopped years ago. People start going, why aren't we just jumping on a live call with them? And it's so much more convenient for everybody. Not only does it save the business money, but it also saves everybody's time. This person's going to take away 4 or 5 days out of their life to come and sit with us just for a day.
Yeah. And I think this is it. I think education is lacking behind industry in this respect. And actually, the online scenario, in my experience, actually worked very well for some students who would perhaps have been quite reticent in the classroom.
Mm,
But when it was just talking to me on a screen, actually, they contributed a lot more, I think, sitting from the comfort of just, at their desk behind their laptop.
yeah.
It actually helped, well, from my experience, I found that it helped engagement.
Mm,
Whereas speaking in front of a classroom full of people who you think they're going to, think I'm stupid if I say this, um, it's a very different scenario, and it can work in favor of, the student who might not be very good at contributing in class.
I suppose the next thing would be, like, because I agree with what you're saying, like we need to be more creative to some of these solutions, and we need to be a bit more open-minded. You've probably got already a good case study for this, Sheila. Like, it's not only do we think it's better, actually you can prove it works better, or at least works the same, which is probably what schools would be looking for, and the leaders would be looking for. So how do you reach more schools? How do you reach more of the children and young people that need this support?
Well, I think this is a sort of two-pronged approach. So what has happened in recent months is that I've been asked to sort of work as a kind of extension of an existing psychology department. So one school in particular has said, can we send you, 4 or 5 of our struggling students for say 5 intensive lessons, and then when that person has finished, then I get the next student. So it's almost as if, they were going away with a TA to work on something, and instead they're coming to me for 5 intensive online lessons. And again, these are students who've been sitting in a classroom, and the material seems to have largely flown past them
Mm,
in a group situation. But in the one-to-one with me, and given some really nice student-friendly resources, and I also give them a lot of TLC, and lots of encouragement.
mm,
They, we've, again, it's tangible. We've seen people go up, 3 grades just after a couple of
wow.
online one-to-one lessons, because they were focused, and they kind of realized, yeah, actually I can do this,
Mm,
you know. And also, just as we've been saying, you celebrate the little wins. If we can master, one little aspect of research methods, or if we can remember, the definitions from last week, that's great,
mm,
and that gets celebrated in the
mm,
one-to-one scenario, whereas that can't really happen in the group
no.
situation. But also listening to what Sharon Corley was saying recently on the Q&A session, I have been truly inspired. So thank you, Sharon, if you listen to this, to pursue a sort of a different model of tutoring. So I'm slightly unusual in that a lot of my business doesn't come from individual students. It does tend to come from the school leaders.
Mm,
And I remember Sharon saying to me that, you're kind of, full of energy, but you're a one-woman band. You need a team. So I'm grouping together with 2 of my former work colleagues who are themselves hugely experienced as psychology teachers and examiners, teacher trainers, in fact, as well.
yeah.
And we are making a team of specialists. And our next step really is to be going to some of the conferences that the head teachers attend. And we are going to have a stall at the conferences, and we're going to say, this is what we can do for you. we have all this experience. We're very used to going into situations, turning them around, invigorating departments, and just getting things back, on the right track and putting people in a happy place. So that is what we're going to do. We're going to do conferences. We're also going to try and write articles in the publications that school leaders will be reading. We've got to research those yet.
I'm going to suggest somebody to you now.
Right.
Called Schools Mailing.
Okay, yeah.
His name's Rob.
Right.
He's the main guy down there. So if you research, this is a free plug for Schools Mailing. Schools Mailing Rob, he's a great guy. Very powerful marketing tool for education teams. It comes with a bit of a caveat that usually works with larger education companies, but has a huge reach. So definitely worth having a chat with him.
Right. Yeah. That sounds wonderful. Yeah. So yeah, and again, word of mouth. I mean, we have had some very powerful testimonials from all the heads that we've worked with, who kind of said, you kind of saved us from the wrath of parents and disappointed students. We did wonder what on earth we were going to do, and then you basically provided the solution. So again, I think word of mouth is hugely powerful because as I say, this problem isn't going to go away. There's always going to be a need for, people to go into situations. And in a subject like ours, where it is so popular, students who want to do medicine tend to do biology, chemistry, maths, psychology. It goes with, kind of arts profile as well. It goes with the social science profile.
Goes with business.
And it goes with business. It goes with languages. So this is why we're sort of trying to find the best ways of talking to school leaders, because rather than the individual students, the school leaders are our market. And when they come to us, these are big contracts. These are 6 months, year-long contracts. And it's a lot of work when we take something on, especially when, you might have had a teacher, dare I say it, teaching the wrong syllabus. And turning things around. So they are big, big deals when they do come to fruition.
Hey everybody, just a huge favor to ask from me to you. If you're getting value from these podcasts, please consider giving the channel a subscribe on YouTube or a follow on Spotify. It really helps get the podcast in front of as many people as possible, which is the ultimate aim of why I do what I do, trying to bring people together to create as many connections as we can. So please give the page a follow, give us a subscribe on YouTube, and I'll be eternally grateful. Thank you. Back to the pod. I've got quite a few ideas for you to reach people, and not organically as well. I do think going to conferences would be a really good return on investment. But because you've got a following already, there are loads of ways of like creating a touch point into your business where lots of leaders can sort of congregate online just to listen, almost to like a Dragon's Den type sales pitch, but not delivered in that way. It's a lot softer. And really, you're just going to be sharing the results that you've had and the reasons why this is a good idea. There's lots of ways of doing that. Perhaps we'll talk after real briefly about how you
that
could
would
do
be
it.
That sounds great. Yeah, because I mean it's I've tried writing to head teachers, especially when I've had a tutee who clearly, has not had the best deal in the classroom. And I don't get replies very often. It takes a very positive head, I think, to
Yeah.
respond to something like that. Whereas if I approach them in a different way, I think it could be a lot more successful.
Yeah, I think that I've
Um,
definitely got one idea in particular. I think it's basically an event-based type approach, but you'd promote it on LinkedIn. But we'll talk about that, I think, at the end, because I think there's
yeah,
lots of ways of developing this in an organic way with the results you've already got, and it would
yeah.
be a shame to invest into other things, like whether it's schools mailing or like the publications that get sent round, because those things aren't, they're not inexpensive. Let's put it that way. They're a
No,
big investment.
yeah, that's right. And so you need to see some sort of return, and the direct mail just seemed to be a very kind of scattergun approach
Mm.
and not really hitting the mark.
And there's loads of reasons for that. And a lot of it's about building relationships and being like, if you're going to do direct mail and even emailing campaigns,
Mm,
most of the time we don't know the people well enough to keep reading, and it happens over time, and so you have to keep
yeah,
doing it. Therefore, that's a lot of money to keep investing, and sometimes even your time that goes into it as well is quite a
yeah.
lot, and it's not an easy
Mm,
thing.
no,
But
no.
schools at crisis points, schools that have been through the crisis points, who would be your champions, you can
Mm,
leverage a lot of that into the next phase of your business, which it sounds
yeah.
like you're coming up to the next phase of your business now.
Well, this is it. I mean, this is why I am very grateful to Sharon for sort of suggesting how we can
Mm,
expand, because I've sort of set the ball rolling,
yeah,
but I think we've reached the time when actually we do need to think in a bigger way,
yeah.
and resource it on a bigger scale.
Exciting times,
Um,
Sheila.
you know.
Amazing, amazing.
It is, but again, a complete surprise is what I would also like to add, Richard. I never ever thought this is how it would work out. I thought I was going to be tutoring students online. That was,
Mm,
exactly, my first website was geared all towards, students and making the experience really good for them.
yeah,
Whereas I've had to shift the emphasis of the website. You know, geared more towards the school leader. I mean, obviously, still, helping students
mm,
who come to me for tuition. But I've got a sort of a different focus
yeah.
on the website now.
I think, I mean, we were speaking before, and I'm saying about different rabbit holes I go down in terms of knowledge and questions or things I just ponder over time. And something which was said to me, oh, I don't know now, a little while ago, was like really important to niche. It's like, Richard, you make sure you niche into your market. You know what your niche is. Just, and I was like, when I first started, I didn't have a clue really, and I kind of just made it up. And I was like, well, I'm just going to help homework support, and I like teaching maths. That's probably my go-to,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what
Mm-hmm.
I did. And then by 6 months later, I wasn't doing any of that.
Yeah,
Things change over time, and business change, and you change because you adapt to the needs of the market. And I know we're kind of really dehumanizing a lot of tuition. I don't want to do that, but that's essentially what we would do. And then if you've got
yeah,
20 people knocking on your door asking you to do this one thing, and you can do it and you love doing
mm,
it, you're going to move towards it, and everything needs to change around that, and that's
yeah,
and that's
yeah.
fine.
And I think I've really benefited, not only from the sort of um, the changes in psychology, but also, this online learning
Mm.
has opened up, possibilities for me that I never dreamed would be possible. I do have to pinch myself sometimes when
So
I
are you
think
so you live in Portugal full time,
I do. Yes,
and you don't
yes.
come back to
So,
the UK at all?
well, occasionally.
Yeah.
So, for the last school that I've just been working for, I went back. Well, I did the very first week of January with them to find the lie of the land, really, and just see how bad the
Mm.
situation was. We formulated a plan. The students got to know me quite well that week.
Mm.
And then we went online. And then I went back shortly before they did their IB exams, and we did some intensive revision sessions. And then I've been asked to go back in September just for a week, to make sure that my successors are on the right lines and they're
Okay.
carrying forward all the good practice that
Yeah.
that I've put into place. So again, a little bit of teacher training
Yeah.
in September for a week. But yeah, I mean, I do, pinch myself sometimes when I think I sit here in my little hilltop village in Portugal, and then I'm online to, a myriad of schools in the UK,
Yeah.
and it is perfectly possible, and it works really well.
What an
So
age
it
we live
is
in. Amazing.
marvelous. It
Yeah.
is marvelous what
Yeah.
technology can do for us. It really is.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was one of the reasons I started to think about leaving teaching. I was sort of 33, 34. I read
Mm.
a book called The 4 Hour Work Week. I don't know if this is one that you're familiar with.
Yes, I do know it.
Right. So,
Yes.
and it was that idea that, oh, you can just travel the world and work. You don't have to worry about being in one place anymore.
Mm.
Those times of having to get
Mm.
up at sort of 7, get to work for 9, come home for 6,
Mm.
being in that physical place. Actually, if you can utilize your skills in the right way, set yourself up in the right way, there's no need to be like that anymore. And although in education, that's kind of felt like, even when I was 33, 34, when I read that book, that didn't seem possible. But in fact, I remember I used to go to the gym quite a bit, and there was a retired head teacher, and we used to chat quite a bit. And I'd come downstairs, I'd finished my session, came downstairs, and I was having a coffee, reading the book. And she came over and she went, "That's not your life, Rich. You can't do a 4-hour work week." But even just the premise of it, and I was explaining to her, because she basically lived a life like that. Now, after she retired, she would work all over and not be confined to one space or one place. But
Mm.
actually, like you are now the living example of
Yeah.
how this could actually work in
It
education.
and
If we have
it
creative
is.
leaders,
Yeah.
it's there, it can work.
It's incredible. And I actually live amongst a community of digital nomads, because near
Wow.
where I live in Portugal, there is quite a surfing community.
Right.
So I'm quite near the beautiful Atlantic coast with some fantastic surfing beaches. And
Yeah.
the number of people who are digital
Yeah.
nomads, and then they surf, and they combine their passion for surfing with their work. So being a
Mm.
digital nomad here is not unusual. There are
Mm.
lots of people doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm just, kind of doing it in education, which, again, I never thought possible.
I do think that, and it's amazing to be able to share this, and you being able to share this story and where you've taken it, because I do believe that we confine ourselves to these traditional ways of working, and it's hard to see outside of that. But this could work, like potentially, like you're focused on the UK. I mean, I think you're sitting on a massive business in terms of reach, because psychology is taught around the world, and if you can do it in the UK via a laptop and a screen and a camera and a microphone, and the UK can receive that, so can the States, so can the independent British schools in the UAE and
Yeah,
China,
yeah.
and go on and go on. And suddenly you could be heading up a team of, I don't know whether you could convince all the psychology people to come and work for you, Sheila. Hopefully you can, but the potential is actually really huge. When you start thinking about the flexibility of what you've created and the social proof you've already got, it's a bit of a mind-boggling situation.
It is. In fact, when I was talking with my new my team this morning, we were kind of brainstorming how we could possibly access the heads of international schools across the world. If there was some body that they all
Yes, there
belong
is. I'll
to
tell you that
or something.
afterwards.
Oh, right. Okay. That's marvelous. You're a great font of information. um, but again, I'm sure there are lots of international schools who would benefit enormously from our our experience. This
Mm,
is experience that's been accumulated over, the past quarter of a century, in a variety of schools as well. It's
Yeah.
not, we're not just limited to a particular demographic.
No.
We've all taught in very different scenarios. So yeah, exciting times.
It really is. It really is. There's so much scope to what you're doing, and I think it's exciting because it's breaking down previous boundaries that would have been in place, and it's using the knowledge of what happened over COVID, but taking it to the next level. Like, this is something that can stay around, and it's a really creative solution to something that is going to be a problem, like you say, for a long time, unless something drastically changes between a psychology graduate coming out of university and the lure of education. There's going to be a problem, isn't it?
There is. I think there's got to be some way of making education a lot more attractive.
Yes.
In the UK. Because the graduates and the teachers, the qualified teachers are there, but they seem to go abroad. From what I gather, and this is what the PGCE leaders on the psychology training courses say themselves. They're very proud of supplying the world with teachers who can do a really good job in psychology. But it does mean there is a desperate shortage in the UK system, and this is when you get really awkward situations when people are suddenly asked to teach psychology when they might have done a related subject, but it's not their subject, and that it can be really successful with support, but very often people are in single person departments. There are not many psychology departments that can command 2 or 3 psychology teachers. It's generally a sole teacher in a psychology department, because it's not commonly taught at GCSE, so it is really just A-level, and so you get a lot of single person departments, which is a scary place to be, I think, if you're not feeling confident in your teaching. So this is where we can really, really help.
Well, I mean, at the start, Sheila, you said you had a really unique, I suppose, journey, you said, but I think you've lived up to that, by the way. This is super unique. I mean, there wouldn't be many people delivering a business to schools in this way. Not at the level. I mean, there are some online tutors, but this is definitely out there. Not something I've heard of before, of people living around the world and delivering sessions online, particularly in this subject. And I think that what you've done is highlighted a problem with the psychology grads coming out. Like, how can we tempt these people to stay and teach in the UK, but also that we can solve this problem just by having a bit of a creative mind and open mind to other solutions. So I'm actually really excited for you. And I remember this question coming up in the Q&A with Sharon, and Sharon's response about being a consultant and going in and actually almost like helicoptering in and out rather than being there and staying there. But when you was talking about being a one person department, that's been you up till now, and so your plans is to have other people get on board.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so sort of more of the consultant approach, and then have a team around you, which I think is an excellent suggestion. It's definitely the way forward. So it's been a great initial 4 years, and then now is the time for expansion, I think.
Definitely. Sheila, what I'm going to do is I want to book you in for a second chat, because I wrote loads of notes down. I obviously do a bit of research on everybody. So I had a look on LinkedIn and I looked at your website and saw the book. And then when we was chatting before pressing record, you said about using August as a writing block. And what you're writing about just sounds really interesting, and I really want to share it with people. But I realized that we're ticking down the minutes in this podcast, that we probably need a part 2.
I would be delighted.
I'd love
I
to
would
get
be
you back on and
delighted.
talk about it. It's
Yes.
really
Yeah.
interesting. We spoke about it for about 15 minutes at the start. And then I was like, oh, what should we talk about? And you was like, oh, we've got this. We need to talk about tuition. I was like, yeah, of course we do. So with part 2, we can still talk about tuition, but we're definitely going to squeeze in the new book.
Yes, absolutely. I would be delighted. So that, I mean, as a sneak preview, if anybody's interested. So it's a sort of combination of psychology and languages, and it's all about, well, the working title is Words of Love. And there are some languages that have lots of different words for love, like ancient Greek had 6, Sanskrit has about 75. But until recently, Japanese didn't have a word for love. And it's not that they didn't feel experience the feeling. It was just that it wasn't expressed. And there's all other aspects of love, like the symbols, etc. So that is basically where I'm focusing during my writer's retreat this August, while I'm not doing quite so much teaching.
I can't wait to talk about this a bit more, like in the future, because also we were talking a little bit about writing as well, not just like that does fascinate me, the language of love around the world, that's just, and symbols as well, bringing that into play. But just the process of writing is something which we sort of started to talk about, and I'll be fascinated to pick your brains over that as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a pleasure. It's been what an amazing journey, 4-year journey from sort of moving to Portugal and setting up these businesses and getting them off the ground to the point now where you're ready to grow into teams and just support the UK and possibly the world as well. I think that is something that should be on your world domination plan sheet. I can't wait to catch up with you again with this topic in mind, because in a year's time, I can't even begin to imagine the kind of news stories that you'd have.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Richard, and I'm looking forward to part 2 tremendously. Hope everybody finds it interesting.
Sure. Thank you, Sheila.
Okay, thanks, Richard.